My name is Samantha Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. Standing outside my parents' $5 million mansion in Beverly Hills, I clutched the rejection letter they'd just handed me. $70,000 was apparently too risky for my tech startup that could revolutionize fraud detection. But as I walked to my beat-up Honda Civic, I overheard my father on the phone discussing a $725,000 wire transfer to my brother Jason. My heart shattered into a million pieces. Before we dive into this story of family betrayal that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I went from the family disappointment to building a $50 million empire, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories. Trust me, this journey gets wild. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant living in Jason's shadow from day one. My brother, 3 years older at 31, could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in computer science and business, Jason barely scraped through community college before dropping out entirely. Yet somehow, he remained the golden child who could charm our parents, Harold and Diane Mitchell, out of anything. My parents built their real estate empire from scratch, starting with a single property flip in the 1980s and growing into one of California's most successful development companies. They preached hard work and merit, values I embodied throughout my life. I worked 3 jobs through college, graduated debt-free, and landed a prestigious position at a Fortune 500 tech company where I quickly climbed the corporate ladder. My startup idea wasn't some pipe dream either. I'd developed a revolutionary algorithm that could detect financial fraud patterns in real time, potentially saving businesses millions annually. I had prototypes, beta testing results, and preliminary interest from major corporations. When I approached my parents that Tuesday afternoon in their marble-floored living room, I came prepared. I presented a detailed business plan, financial projections, market analysis, and letters of intent from potential clients. The $70,000 would cover initial development costs, patent filing, and 6 months of operating expenses. Conservative estimates projected breaking even within 18 months and achieving profitability shortly after. My father barely glanced at the documents before shaking his head. "Samantha, the tech industry is too volatile right now. We can't risk that kind of money on something so uncertain." My mother nodded in agreement, her manicured fingers dismissing months of preparation with a wave. "Perhaps you should stick to your stable job instead of chasing these entrepreneurial fantasies." The words stung, but the real dagger came 3 hours later. As I sat in my car processing their rejection, I heard my father's voice through their open office window. He was authorizing a $725,000 transfer to Jason's business account for his third entrepreneurial venture. This wasn't a loan or investment requiring documentation and repayment terms. This was a gift free and clear, to fund my brother's latest scheme involving artisanal coffee distribution. That evening, I called Jason directly, needing to understand how he'd secured 10 times what I'd requested. His casual response revealed everything I needed to know about our family dynamics. "Come on, Sam, you know how Mom and Dad feel about risky investments. But coffee's different, people always need coffee." When I pressed him about his previous 2 failed businesses that had cost our parents over $400,000 combined, he laughed. "Those were learning experiences. This time's different." The hypocrisy was staggering. Jason's track record included a failed nightclub that closed within 6 months, and a clothing line that never sold a single item. Yet my proven expertise and carefully researched proposal were deemed too risky. That night, I realized this wasn't about risk assessment or business acumen. This was about gender, favoritism, and a family dynamic I'd been blind to my entire life. I began documenting everything, starting with the phone conversation I'd overheard. Using skills learned during my tech career, I started investigating my family's financial patterns. Bank statements, tax records, property transfers, everything painted the same picture. Jason received consistent financial support regardless of his failures, while my achievements went unacknowledged and unrewarded. The family business I'd been excluded from supposedly to protect me was actually protecting them from my competence and integrity. My investigation into the family finances revealed disturbing patterns that went far beyond simple favoritism. Late nights spent analyzing documents and cross-referencing public records exposed a web of questionable business practices that made my stomach churn. Mitchell Development Corporation wasn't just successful. It was built on systematic fraud that could topple everything my parents claimed to represent. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became why I'd been kept away from the family business. Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother and company chief financial officer, had been falsifying property appraisals for years. They'd inflate land values to secure larger construction loans, then pocket the difference through shell companies. Environmental impact reports were routinely falsified, building permits obtained through bribery, and safety inspections bypassed entirely. The seven-figure profits weren't from shrewd business decisions. They were from criminal enterprise. My exclusion suddenly made perfect sense. With my ethical standards and technical expertise, I would have discovered their schemes immediately. Jason's inclusion wasn't about family loyalty. It was about having someone controllable who'd never question questionable practices, or possess the skills to expose them. My brother wasn't just the golden child. He was the perfect accomplice who'd never threatened their criminal operation. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer during a family dinner the following Sunday. As I sat at their dining room table, listening to Uncle Robert discuss upcoming municipal partnerships, I recognized the code language they were using. These weren't legitimate business relationships. They were bribery arrangements with city officials who'd expedite permits and overlook violations in exchange for cash payments and luxury vacations. My cousin Emma, Uncle Robert's daughter and my closest confidant since childhood, seemed genuinely surprised when I casually mentioned my job search in the fraud investigation sector. Her reaction felt off, too rehearsed, too careful. When I tested her by sharing some preliminary findings about local real estate irregularities, she asked pointed questions that revealed more knowledge than an art history graduate should possess about municipal corruption patterns. The betrayal came to light 3 days later when my father confronted me about spreading malicious rumors regarding the family business. He knew specific details I'd only shared with Emma, proving she'd been reporting our conversations to the family. My trusted cousin, the person I'd confided in about feeling excluded and undervalued, had been their informant all along. The family hadn't just rejected my business proposal. They'd been monitoring me to ensure I wouldn't threaten their criminal enterprise. That evening, armed with mounting evidence and growing suspicion, I discovered the most devastating betrayal yet. Documents hidden in my father's home office revealed that my inheritance trust fund, established by my grandfather before his death, had been systematically drained to fund Jason's lifestyle and failed businesses. Forged signatures, backdated contracts, and falsified legal documents showed years of theft from my future. The money wasn't just missing. It had been deliberately stolen by the people who'd raised me. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Over $800,000 intended for my education, housing, and future security had been redirected to Jason's accounts through fraudulent transactions. My parents hadn't just favored my brother. They'd systematically robbed me to enable his failures while convincing me I was the family disappointment who deserved nothing. My determination to expose their crimes intensified when I connected with Marcus Thompson, an investigative journalist who'd been tracking municipal corruption patterns across Southern California. Our initial meeting at a downtown coffee shop felt like finding an oasis in a desert of family betrayal. Marcus had been investigating Mitchell Development Corporation for months, following tips from whistleblowers who'd witnessed safety violations and environmental crimes at construction sites. When I shared my insider evidence with Marcus, his eyes widened with recognition. My documentation filled gaps in his investigation that he'd been unable to bridge without access to internal company records. Together, we began building a comprehensive case that would expose not just my family's financial crimes, but their systematic corruption of public officials and endangerment of public safety. The retaliation came swiftly. Within a week of my meeting with Marcus, my parents filed a restraining order claiming I'd been harassing them and making threats regarding their business. The legal documents painted me as an unstable individual whose jealousy over my brother's success had driven me to desperate measures. Character witnesses included Uncle Robert, Emma, and several family friends who testified to my increasingly erratic behavior and unfounded accusations against respectable business people. Standing in that courthouse, listening to my family systematically destroy my reputation through perjured testimony, I realized the true cost of challenging their criminal empire. They weren't just protecting illegal profits. They were willing to destroy me entirely to preserve their facade of respectability. With legal restrictions limiting my direct approach, I leveraged my technical expertise to wage digital warfare against the family business. My computer science background and years in corporate cybersecurity provided tools they couldn't comprehend or counter. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what real damage looked like when executed by someone who actually understood modern technology. I started subtly, introducing minor glitches into their project management systems that delayed timelines and confused scheduling. Database queries would randomly time out, email servers would experience intermittent failures, and their customer relationship management system would occasionally lose track of important client communications. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but sufficient to create operational friction that frustrated clients and cost money. The beauty of technological sabotage was its deniability. When their systems malfunctioned, they assumed it was normal IT problems that plagued any growing business. Uncle Robert would call expensive consultants who'd find nothing wrong with the hardware or basic software configurations. They never suspected that their excluded family member possessed the advanced skills necessary to infiltrate their networks remotely and create targeted disruptions. My third major betrayal came from an unexpected source. Lisa Rodriguez had been my closest friend since graduate school, the person I'd trusted with my deepest fears about family rejection and career uncertainty. When I confided my growing suspicions about Mitchell Development Corporation's illegal activities, she seemed supportive and encouraging. Her background in business law made her someone I valued for strategic advice about building a case against my family's corruption. Lisa's betrayal revealed itself during what I thought was a friendly lunch meeting. She casually mentioned receiving a job offer from a prominent law firm that specialized in defending white-collar criminals, the same firm that had just been retained by Mitchell Development Corporation to handle their legal affairs. The timing wasn't coincidental. My parents had bought her loyalty with a six-figure position that came with the implicit understanding that she'd monitor my activities and report anything threatening to their interests. The revelation that my best friend had been purchased like a commodity was perhaps more devastating than my family's betrayal. At least with my parents and Uncle Robert, I could attribute their behavior to greed and criminality. But Lisa had pretended to care about me while systematically violating my trust for personal advancement. She'd listened to my pain, offered false comfort, and used my vulnerability to advance her career at my expense. Jason's true nature became apparent when I discovered his history of violence that the family had systematically covered up. Court records sealed through expensive legal maneuvering revealed domestic violence charges from his previous relationships, assault allegations from his failed business partnerships, and a pattern of aggressive behavior toward anyone who challenged him. My gentle, charming brother was actually a dangerous individual whose violence had been hidden behind our family's wealth and influence. The most shocking discovery was Jason's embezzlement of $2.8 million from Mitchell Development Corporation over the past 3 years. He'd been stealing from the same criminal enterprise that enabled his lifestyle, skimming cash from fraudulent transactions and redirecting funds to personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. My brother wasn't just complicit in our parents' crimes. He was actively robbing them while they protected him from consequences. My parents' response to these discoveries was swift and brutal. They froze my bank accounts, claiming I'd stolen corporate funds and used my access to company systems for criminal purposes. Credit cards were canceled, financial assets were seized, and my employment history was systematically destroyed through strategic phone calls to industry contacts. Within 72 hours, I went from financial stability to complete destitution, unable to access money for basic necessities like food and housing. The psychological warfare escalated when they began spreading rumors about my mental health throughout our social circles. Friends I'd known for years started avoiding me, convinced I'd suffered some kind of breakdown that made me dangerous and unpredictable. The narrative they constructed painted me as a jealous sibling whose resentment had driven me to fabricate elaborate conspiracy theories about successful family members who'd tried to help me. When my apartment lease was mysteriously terminated due to financial irregularities reported by my landlord, I realized how thoroughly they intended to destroy my life. The property management company had received anonymous tips about my fraudulent activities and unstable behavior that made me a liability risk they couldn't accept. Within weeks, I was homeless, friendless, and essentially penniless, sleeping in my car while fighting to maintain any semblance of dignity. The darkest moment came when I discovered the full scope of their money laundering operation. Documents I'd managed to copy before losing access revealed international bank accounts, shell corporations in multiple countries, and financial relationships with organized crime figures who use legitimate real estate deals to clean drug money. My family wasn't just corrupt, they were connected to dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate threats to their financial arrangements. Sitting in my car outside a 24-hour diner, contemplating whether I had the strength to continue fighting against such overwhelming odds, I realized that exposing them wasn't just about personal justice anymore. Their criminal enterprise was harming innocent people through unsafe construction practices, environmental destruction, and corruption of public institutions that served entire communities. If I gave up, their crimes would continue indefinitely. Desperation drove me to take the most dangerous step possible: contacting federal authorities with evidence of my family's criminal enterprise. The decision wasn't made lightly. I understood that crossing this line would make reconciliation impossible, and potentially put my life at risk if they discovered my cooperation with law enforcement. But the scope of their crimes demanded intervention that only federal agencies could provide. Agent David Rodriguez of the Federal Bureau of Investigation took my initial call on a Tuesday morning, when I'd reached the absolute limits of my endurance. Speaking from a payphone outside a gas station, I outlined the evidence I'd gathered regarding money laundering, municipal corruption, environmental crimes, and systematic fraud spanning multiple jurisdictions. Agent Rodriguez's professional skepticism gradually gave way to serious interest as I described specific transactions, named corrupt officials, and detailed the international scope of their operations. Our first meeting took place in a secure federal building downtown, where I presented 3 years of documented evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of organized criminal activity masquerading as legitimate business. Bank records, email communications, financial statements, and recorded conversations provided irrefutable proof that Mitchell Development Corporation was fundamentally a criminal enterprise that happened to build real estate projects between illegal activities. Agent Rodriguez brought in specialists from the Financial Crimes Division, Environmental Protection Agency, and Internal Revenue Service who each found evidence of violations within their jurisdictions. The case was too large and complex for any single agency to handle independently. Within days, a multi-agency task force was assembled to investigate what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises ever discovered in Southern California. The family's response to increased federal attention was predictable and vicious. Rather than attempting to distance themselves from questionable activities, they doubled down by launching a coordinated attack designed to destroy my credibility before I could testify against them. Uncle Robert led the charge by claiming I'd embezzled funds from a charity board we'd both served on, producing forged documents that suggested I'd stolen money intended for homeless veterans. Jason escalated the character assassination by filing false police reports claiming I'd threatened him with violence and attempted to extort money from the family business. His allegations painted me as a dangerous individual whose desperation had driven me to criminal behavior that threatened public safety. The narrative they constructed was sophisticated and coordinated, designed to preemptively discredit anything I might say about their activities. My grandmother Margaret, the last family member I believed truly cared about me, delivered the most devastating blow when she publicly supported their version of events. The woman who'd taught me about integrity and standing up for what's right testified that I'd always been jealous of Jason's success and had recently displayed concerning behavior that suggested mental instability. Her betrayal was complete and final, severing the last emotional connection I'd maintained with my biological family. The legal jeopardy became real when Jason successfully convinced prosecutors that I'd used my technical skills to commit corporate espionage and cyber crimes against Mitchell Development Corporation. Federal agents appeared at my temporary shelter with a search warrant for electronic devices and documents that might contain evidence of illegal hacking activities. The irony was bitter. The evidence I'd gathered to expose their crimes was now being used to prosecute me for gathering it. Catherine Hayes, the attorney Marcus had recommended, worked tirelessly to build a defense strategy that would protect me from prosecution while preserving the evidence necessary to convict my family. Her expertise in white-collar criminal defense was crucial as we navigated the complex legal landscape where my status shifted constantly between witness, victim, and potential defendant depending on which charges prosecutors prioritized on any given day. Private investigators hired by my family began following me everywhere, documenting my activities, and attempting to provoke confrontations that could be recorded and used to support their claims about my dangerous mental state. These weren't security professionals. They were intimidation specialists whose job was making my life so miserable that I'd abandon my cooperation with federal authorities in exchange for being left alone. The stress of constant surveillance, legal uncertainty, and social isolation took a severe toll on my physical and mental health. Emergency room visits for stress-induced chest pains and panic attacks provided additional ammunition for their character assassination campaign. Medical records were leaked to family friends who spread rumors about my deteriorating mental condition and increasingly erratic behavior. The lowest point came when I collapsed during a grocery shopping trip and was hospitalized for exhaustion and malnutrition. Living in my car, surviving on convenience store food, and maintaining constant vigilance against family retaliation had pushed my body beyond its limits. As I lay in that hospital bed, connected to 4 fluids and surrounded by the impersonal efficiency of modern medicine, I seriously considered abandoning the fight and disappearing to start over somewhere far away. That's when I met Jennifer Walsh, a social worker who specialized in helping whistleblowers navigate the psychological challenges of exposing powerful criminal organizations. Jennifer had worked with dozens of people who'd sacrificed everything to do the right thing, and she understood the unique trauma of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. Her guidance helped me understand that my emotional devastation was a normal response to extraordinary circumstances, not evidence of mental instability as my family claimed. Through Jennifer's support group, I connected with other whistleblowers who'd exposed corporate corruption and survived the inevitable retaliation that followed. Their stories gave me strength and perspective, showing that people could rebuild their lives after losing everything to do what's right. More importantly, they helped me understand that my family's crimes would continue harming innocent people if I gave up, making my sacrifice meaningless unless I saw the fight through to the end. Part 6. The Counteroffensive ***. The strategic coordination between myself, Marcus, Catherine, and Agent Rodriguez marked the beginning of our systematic counterattack against my family's criminal enterprise. Our team possessed complementary skills that created synergistic advantages. Marcus's investigative journalism experience, Catherine's legal expertise, Agent Rodriguez's federal resources, and my technical knowledge of their systems and operations. Together, we developed a comprehensive strategy that would expose their crimes while protecting me from their increasingly desperate retaliation. Marcus's newspaper articles began appearing daily, each one revealing another layer of Mitchell Development Corporation's criminal activities. His journalistic credentials and careful fact-checking made the stories impossible to dismiss as unfounded accusations from a disgruntled family member. Public attention shifted from my alleged mental instability to substantive questions about municipal corruption, environmental destruction, and systematic fraud that had been hidden for years behind charitable donations and community involvement. The media coverage attracted attention from other victims of my family's crimes, people I'd never known existed who'd been harmed by their illegal activities. Construction workers who'd suffered injuries due to ignored safety protocols, families whose homes had been built with substandard materials, and small business owners who'd been defrauded through fake bidding processes began contacting Marcus with their own evidence and testimonies. Community support materialized from unexpected sources, as the true scope of their crimes became public knowledge. Other startup founders rallied around my story, recognizing the gender discrimination and family favoritism that had driven my initial rejection. Professional organizations in the tech industry offered resources and networking opportunities that helped me maintain some connection to my career field despite the ongoing legal battles. Jason's arrogance proved to be his greatest weakness as media attention intensified. Rather than maintaining a low profile while legal proceedings unfolded, he granted interviews where he consistently made incriminating statements about his family's business practices. His attempts to justify questionable activities revealed detailed knowledge of illegal operations that contradicted his previous claims of minimal involvement in company affairs. The FBI's financial investigation gained momentum when they successfully froze numerous bank accounts associated with Mitchell Development Corporation and its shell companies. Asset forfeiture proceedings targeted properties that had been purchased with proceeds from criminal activities, effectively shutting down their ongoing operations while preserving evidence for prosecution. The financial pressure forced them to liquidate legitimate assets to pay legal fees, gradually dismantling their economic power base. Uncle Robert's decision to cooperate with federal authorities was the breakthrough we'd been hoping for. Facing decades in federal prison for his role in money laundering and municipal corruption, he agreed to provide detailed testimony about the family's criminal operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. His insider knowledge filled critical gaps in the prosecution's case that external evidence alone couldn't have provided. The family business collapsed rapidly as clients fled and employees quit rather than risk association with a criminal enterprise under federal investigation. Construction projects were abandoned mid-completion, leaving massive financial liabilities and legal exposure that consumed their remaining resources. The empire they'd built over decades crumbled within months, once their crimes became public knowledge. However, their response to these setbacks was increasingly violent and desperate. Death threats began arriving through multiple channels, including anonymous phone calls, threatening letters, and online harassment that escalated to specific threats against my physical safety. The language used suggested knowledge of my daily routines and locations that could only come from continued surveillance by professional intimidation specialists. Property damage to my few remaining possessions signaled that their threats weren't empty posturing. My car was vandalized multiple times. Temporary shelter arrangements were disrupted through false reports to authorities, and personal belongings were destroyed or stolen whenever I left them unattended. The message was clear. Cooperation with federal authorities would result in escalating harassment that could eventually turn deadly. Agent Rodriguez arranged protective custody when intelligence indicated that my family was considering more direct action to stop my testimony. Federal marshals provided security escorts to court appearances and safe houses where I could stay during particularly dangerous periods. The level of protection required demonstrated how seriously law enforcement took the threats against my safety. The second near defeat came when my family's expensive legal team successfully challenged key pieces of evidence on technical grounds related to how they'd been obtained. Catherine worked frantically to preserve the most crucial documentation, while developing alternative legal strategies that could withstand appellate review. Months of work appeared to be unraveling due to procedural technicalities that could potentially invalidate the entire case. The stress of these setbacks, combined with ongoing physical threats and social isolation, pushed me to another breaking point where I questioned whether seeking justice was worth the personal cost. The legal system moved slowly while my family's harassment continued daily, creating a prolonged period of uncertainty where I couldn't move forward with my life or return to any semblance of normalcy. During this dark period, I found inspiration in letters from strangers who'd followed my story through Marcus's reporting. Families affected by unsafe construction practices, environmental activists concerned about illegal dumping, and municipal employees who'd witnessed corruption but lacked the courage to report it wrote to express their support and gratitude for my sacrifice. Their messages reminded me that this fight was bigger than personal justice. It was about protecting communities from predatory criminals who used wealth and influence to escape accountability. The courtroom became our primary battlefield as multiple legal proceedings unfolded simultaneously across federal and state jurisdictions. Civil lawsuits seeking damages for fraud and discrimination ran parallel to criminal prosecutions for money laundering, bribery, and conspiracy. Each case required extensive preparation, testimony, and evidence presentation that consumed months of intensive preparation while my family's legal team fought every charge with unlimited financial resources. The discovery of my grandfather's original will in a safety deposit box that had been deliberately hidden from probate proceedings provided the smoking gun we'd needed to prove systematic theft of my inheritance. The authentic document, complete with witnesses and notarization that predated the forged versions my parents had used to justify redirecting funds to Jason, definitively established their guilt in stealing over $2 million that had been intended for my education and future security. Jason's history of violence became undeniable when previous victims found the courage to come forward with detailed accounts of abuse that had been covered up through intimidation and financial settlements. Police reports that had been buried, hospital records that documented injuries, and witness statements that had been suppressed through legal threats painted a picture of systematic violence that contradicted the charming public persona he'd maintained for years. My parents' desperation reached new heights when federal agents discovered their attempt to flee the country with $17 million in cash and precious metals. Airport security detained them at Los Angeles International Airport with false passports and documentation, suggesting they'd planned to establish new identities in countries without extradition treaties. Their capture while attempting to escape prosecution provided powerful evidence of consciousness of guilt that strengthened all pending cases. The international manhunt that followed revealed the global scope of their criminal enterprise. Swiss bank accounts, Cayman Islands shell corporations, and real estate holdings in multiple countries demonstrated sophisticated money laundering operations that had been moving illegal profits offshore for over a decade. Interpol cooperation helped identify assets that could be seized and repatriated to compensate victims of their crimes. Jason's direct threat against my safety finally provided law enforcement with grounds for immediate arrest rather than waiting for the conclusion of financial investigations. Video surveillance captured him following me through a grocery store parking lot while making explicit threats of physical violence if I continued cooperating with federal authorities. His arrest on stalking and intimidation charges effectively removed him from circulation, while other cases proceeded. Federal protective custody became necessary when intelligence suggested that my family had contacted organized crime associates about solving their problem through violence. The same criminal networks they'd used for money laundering were apparently being consulted about eliminating the witness whose testimony threatened to expose decades of illegal activities. United States Marshals provided around-the-clock protection while prosecutors accelerated their timeline for bringing formal charges. My grandmother Margaret's death under suspicious circumstances shocked even me, despite everything else my family had done. The woman who'd raised me during my parents' frequent business trips, who taught me about integrity and moral courage, died alone in her mansion from what police initially ruled an accidental fall. However, evidence of forced entry, missing jewelry, and suspicious circumstances suggested something far more sinister than a simple accident. Uncle Robert's revelation that Margaret had been murdered because she'd threatened to expose the family's crimes if they continued harassing me was the final straw that broke any remaining emotional connection I'd maintained. According to his detailed confession, Margaret had discovered evidence proving that her own son and daughter-in-law had systematically stolen from her grandchildren's trust funds, and was prepared to testify against them in court. The evidence tampering became apparent when fire investigators determined that the warehouse blaze that destroyed Mitchell Development Corporation's records was arson designed to eliminate documentation of criminal activities. Accelerants, sophisticated timing devices, and professional techniques suggested the involvement of experienced criminals who specialized in destroying evidence for wealthy clients facing prosecution. Catherine's discovery of my grandfather's hidden safety deposit box, accessed through a key Margaret had secretly provided before her death, contained original documents that my family had assumed were permanently destroyed. Contracts, financial records, correspondence, and photographic evidence spanning 3 decades provided irrefutable proof of systematic criminal activity that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The federal grand jury returned indictments charging my parents, Jason, Uncle Robert, and 12 associates with conspiracy, money laundering, murder, fraud, bribery, and environmental crimes that carried potential sentences exceeding life imprisonment. The scope and severity of charges reflected not just the financial magnitude of their crimes, but also the violence they'd used to protect their criminal enterprise. My testimony before the grand jury lasted 4 days, and covered every aspect of their criminal operations that I'd discovered through my investigation. Prosecutors were particularly interested in the systematic exclusion of family members who might threaten their operations, the deliberate cultivation of compliant accomplices like Jason, and the sophisticated methods they'd used to hide illegal profits through legitimate business activities. The emotional impact of testifying against my biological family was devastating despite everything they'd done to me. Sitting in that federal courthouse, under oath, providing evidence that would likely result in their spending the remainder of their lives in prison felt like a betrayal of fundamental family loyalty, even though I knew rationally that they'd betrayed me first and far more severely. However, reading victim impact statements from families whose children had been poisoned by illegal dumping, workers who'd been permanently disabled by unsafe construction practices, and communities whose public officials had been corrupted by systematic bribery, helped me understand that my testimony was protecting innocent people from predatory criminals who used family connections to escape accountability for their crimes. The coordinated arrests that took place across multiple states and international jurisdictions resembled a military operation designed to prevent any family members or associates from escaping justice. Federal agents, supported by local law enforcement and international partners, simultaneously raided 17 locations while executing search warrants for financial records, electronic communications, and physical evidence that had been hidden throughout their criminal network. Asset seizure operations froze over $400 million in bank accounts, real estate holdings, and business investments that prosecutors claimed represented proceeds from illegal activities spanning 2 decades. The government's ability to trace illegal profits through sophisticated money laundering schemes demonstrated the extensive financial investigation that had been conducted while criminal charges were being prepared. The international scandal intensified when Swiss banking authorities revealed that Mitchell Development Corporation had used their institutions to hide over $60 million in proceeds from environmental crimes, municipal corruption, and tax evasion. Cooperation agreements between United States and Swiss authorities enabled the freezing and eventual repatriation of funds that had been moved offshore specifically to avoid detection by domestic law enforcement agencies. Additional victims emerged daily as news coverage encouraged people who'd been harmed by my family's criminal activities to contact authorities with their own evidence and testimonies. Construction workers, environmental activists, municipal employees, business partners, and community members provided detailed accounts of systematic criminal behavior that had been hidden behind charitable contributions and public relations campaigns designed to maintain their reputation for corporate responsibility. The civil lawsuit I'd filed seeking damages for fraud, theft, and discrimination resulted in a jury verdict awarding $37 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The judgment represented not just financial restitution for money they'd stolen from my inheritance, but also recognition of the systematic discrimination and harassment I'd endured for challenging their criminal enterprise. Criminal convictions followed rapidly as overwhelming evidence made defense strategies impossible to sustain. Uncle Robert's cooperation provided detailed insider testimony that corroborated documentary evidence and filled gaps that external investigation couldn't have discovered. Jason received 47 years in federal prison for money laundering, violent crimes, and conspiracy charges that reflected both his financial crimes and history of violence against women. My parents received life sentences without possibility of parole for murder, conspiracy, money laundering, and environmental crimes that had endangered public health across multiple communities. The judge's sentencing statement emphasized that their systematic corruption of public institutions and willingness to commit violence to protect illegal profits represented a level of criminality that warranted permanent removal from society. The business empire they'd built over 30 years was systematically dismantled through asset forfeiture proceedings that transferred ownership of properties, bank accounts, and business interests to victim compensation funds administered by federal courts. Construction projects were completed under court supervision to ensure safety standards were met, while contaminated properties were cleaned up using seized assets. The personal cost of achieving justice was significant, but manageable with proper support systems. Therapy sessions with specialists who understood the unique trauma of family betrayal helped me process the emotional devastation of losing my biological family, while maintaining my sense of moral clarity about the necessity of exposing their crimes. Legal victories provided vindication but couldn't restore the relationships, trust, and sense of security that had been destroyed by their betrayal. Financial compensation enabled me to rebuild my life materially, but couldn't eliminate the psychological scars left by systematic harassment, character assassination, and threats of violence that had characterized their response to being exposed. The rebuilding process began with establishing new living arrangements in a different city, where I could start over without constant reminders of my family's crimes or the legal battles that had consumed 2 years of my life. The settlement money provided financial security that enabled me to focus on healing and planning for the future without the immediate pressure of earning income while processing trauma. Professional relationships were gradually re-established through networking opportunities provided by victim advocacy organizations and legal professionals who'd witnessed my courage throughout the prosecution process. The tech industry's recognition of my expertise and ethical standards opened doors that had been closed through my family's earlier character assassination campaign. The justice system had functioned effectively in this case, but the personal cost of seeking accountability for powerful criminals remained enormous. Other potential whistleblowers contacted me seeking advice about exposing corporate crimes, and I consistently emphasized the importance of building strong support networks before taking action that would inevitably result in retaliation from people with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. The settlement funds from civil litigation provided the capital I'd originally sought from my parents, but with the added satisfaction of using money they'd stolen from me to build something they'd deemed impossible. Starting Truth Tech Solutions in a modest office space in Austin, Texas, felt like a rebirth that honored both my technical expertise and hard-earned understanding of how sophisticated criminals operate within legitimate business environments. Marcus Thompson and Catherine Hayes joined my advisory board, bringing invaluable expertise in investigative journalism and white-collar criminal law that complemented my technical background in developing fraud detection algorithms. Our combined experience prosecuting my family's criminal enterprise provided unique insights into how sophisticated financial crimes are committed and concealed within apparently legitimate business operations. The company's mission statement reflected my personal journey from victim to survivor to advocate, empowering organizations and individuals to identify, expose, and prosecute sophisticated financial crimes through innovative technology and comprehensive support services. Our artificial intelligence platform could analyze vast amounts of financial data to identify patterns indicative of money laundering, embezzlement, bribery, and other white-collar crimes that traditional accounting methods might miss. Truth Tech's initial client base included nonprofit organizations, municipal governments, and small businesses that lacked resources to conduct sophisticated fraud investigations, but needed protection from the kind of systematic criminal activity my family had perpetrated. Our affordable pricing model and user-friendly interface made advanced fraud detection accessible to organizations that couldn't afford traditional forensic accounting services. Rapid growth exceeded all projections as word spread about our platform's effectiveness in identifying financial crimes that had previously gone undetected. Corporate clients appreciated our comprehensive approach that combined technological analysis with practical guidance about building legal cases, preserving evidence, and working with law enforcement agencies to prosecute criminals rather than simply identifying problems without solutions. Major venture capital firms began expressing interest in funding expansion when our platform successfully identified and helped prosecute 3 separate money laundering operations within our first 18 months of operation. The validation of our technology through real-world criminal convictions demonstrated commercial viability that attracted investors who understood the growing market demand for sophisticated fraud detection services. Media recognition followed business success as journalists and industry publications highlighted TruthTech's innovative approach to combating white-collar crime through technology rather than traditional investigative methods. Feature articles in Forbes, Wired, and The Wall Street Journal position me as a thought leader in the emerging field of artificial intelligence applications for fraud detection and prevention. The speaking circuit provided opportunities to share my story with entrepreneur conferences, legal symposiums, and law enforcement training programs where my unique perspective as both victim and prosecutor of sophisticated financial crimes offered valuable insights for professionals fighting similar battles. These engagements also helped build brand recognition that attracted additional clients and partners. Legal reform initiatives benefited from TruthTech's involvement as our technology helped lawmakers understand how existing statutes failed to address sophisticated money laundering schemes and municipal corruption patterns that had evolved beyond traditional law enforcement capabilities. Our data analysis provided evidence supporting stronger whistleblower protections and enhanced asset forfeiture procedures that made prosecuting financial crimes more effective. An unexpected reconciliation attempt came when Jason contacted me from federal prison, claiming he wanted to apologize for his role in the family's crimes, and asking if I'd consider visiting him to discuss making amends for his behavior. His letter seemed genuine and remorseful, describing the psychological damage that growing up in our criminal family had inflicted on him, and his gradual recognition of how wrong their treatment of me had been. However, Catherine's investigation revealed that Jason's outreach was actually part of a scheme to gather information about TruthTech's operations that could be valuable to other criminals seeking to evade fraud detection technology. His apparent remorse was another manipulation attempt designed to exploit my desire for family reconciliation, while serving his continued criminal intentions from within federal prison. The forgiveness journey I eventually embarked on was entirely for my own psychological healing, rather than any attempt to restore relationships with people who'd proven themselves incapable of genuine remorse or change. Working with trauma specialists, I learned to separate forgiveness as an internal process that released me from anger from reconciliation that would require trustworthy behavior my family had never demonstrated. Building new relationships based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared values proved challenging initially, because my experience with family betrayal had damaged my ability to trust other people's intentions. Therapy helped me develop healthy boundaries and communication skills that enabled meaningful connections with colleagues, friends, and eventually romantic partners who appreciated both my professional success and personal integrity. The financial success of TruthTech, which reached a $50 million valuation within 2 years, provided material security, but more importantly validated my judgment about the market demand for sophisticated fraud detection services. The company's growth demonstrated that my original business plan had been sound, and that my parents' rejection had been based on discrimination, rather than legitimate concerns about commercial viability. The therapeutic process of working through family trauma, with specialized professionals who understood the unique challenges faced by financial crime victims, proved essential for rebuilding my psychological foundation. Dr. Sarah Chun, a psychiatrist who'd worked extensively with whistleblowers and fraud victims, helped me understand that my family's behavior represented pathological criminality, rather than normal family dysfunction, that could be resolved through better communication or mutual understanding. Understanding the psychological profiles of people who commit systematic financial crimes helped me recognize that my parents and brother weren't capable of the genuine remorse or behavioral change that would be necessary for any meaningful reconciliation. Their willingness to commit murder to protect illegal profits demonstrated a level of sociopathy that made them permanently dangerous to anyone who threatened their interests, including family members who'd served their purposes. The support network I built included other fraud victims, law enforcement professionals, legal advocates, and technology entrepreneurs who shared my commitment to using business success as a platform for protecting vulnerable people from sophisticated criminals. These relationships provided both personal friendship and professional collaboration that enriched my life in ways that my biological family never had. TruthTech's philanthropic initiatives included establishing the Margaret Mitchell Foundation for Fraud Victims, named after my grandmother who'd been murdered for threatening to expose family crimes. The foundation provides financial assistance, legal support, and psychological counseling for people who've suffered losses due to white-collar crime, particularly those whose families or communities have rejected them for seeking justice against powerful criminals. Educational programs developed in partnership with business schools, law enforcement academies, and continuing education providers help train the next generation of professionals to recognize and combat sophisticated financial crimes. Our curriculum emphasizes the importance of supporting whistleblowers and victims rather than allowing institutional loyalty or family connections to enable criminal behavior. The personal growth I achieved through this ordeal transformed me from someone who'd been passive and accommodating in the face of discrimination into a confident leader who could navigate complex challenges while maintaining ethical standards. Building a successful company while fighting criminal prosecution required developing resilience, strategic thinking, and communication skills that served me well in all aspects of life. My chosen family of loyal friends and trusted colleagues provided the emotional support and mutual care that biological families are supposed to offer, but that mine had never provided even before their crimes were exposed. These relationships, based on shared values rather than genetic connection, proved far more satisfying and reliable than the toxic dynamics I'd grown up accepting as normal. The life lessons learned through this experience extend far beyond business or legal knowledge to fundamental truths about human nature, institutional justice, and personal integrity that shape every decision I make. Trust must be earned through consistent behavior over time rather than assumed based on family relationships or social position. People who demand loyalty while offering none in return are showing you exactly who they are and should be believed. Continuing mission work through Truth Tech and the Foundation ensures that my painful experience serves a greater purpose by protecting other potential victims from similar harm. Every criminal enterprise we help expose, every fraud victim we assist, and every whistleblower we support represents progress toward a society where financial crimes carry real consequences regardless of the perpetrator's wealth or social status. The peaceful closure I've achieved doesn't require forgetting or minimizing the crimes committed against me, but rather accepting that some people choose evil, and that protecting myself and others from their behavior is more important than maintaining relationships that were always based on exploitation rather than genuine love. Sometimes losing toxic family members means gaining the freedom to build an authentic life based on your own values. My future vision includes expanding Truth Tech internationally to combat cross-border financial crimes while continuing to advocate for stronger legal protections for whistleblowers and fraud victims. The business empire I'm building operates on principles of transparency, integrity, and social responsibility that directly contradict everything my biological family represented. The most important wisdom I can share is that betrayal, no matter how devastating initially, can become the catalyst for unprecedented personal and professional success if you're willing to do the hard work of healing while fighting for justice. My parents were wrong about everything: my capabilities, my worth, and my potential for success. Their rejection forced me to prove them wrong in ways that validation never could have motivated. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced family rejection when pursuing your dreams? How did you find the strength to keep going when the people closest to you didn't believe in you? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might inspire someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible tales of overcoming impossible odds, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family rejection doesn't define your potential for success. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the most meaningful victories. Until next time, keep fighting for your dreams no matter who stands in your way.